Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this early literacy session that speaks to policy and the most important piece, which is practice. How do you translate policy into practice? We are joined by Rupen Fofaria, who is considered a storyteller for EdNC, who will be the moderator of this amazing panel and this very timely conversation around how we implement our literacy laws that we're putting into place. So I will kick it off to you, Rupen, and thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kimiana. And yes, welcome everyone to Policy to Practice, what happens after a literacy bill becomes a law. So getting a law which mandates high quality, science-backed literacy instruction through a state legislature is not easy. It's even harder, though, to take a law or policy that has been passed and turn it into meaningful improvement for students. Mississippi has been all over the news for doing just that. And we are joined by an esteemed collection of practitioners who represent every level of education leadership in the forefront of Mississippi's efforts. We have State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Carey Wright. We have State Literacy Director, soon to be Dr. Kristen Wynn. And we have Principal of McNeal Elementary School in Canton, Mississippi, Dr. Shannon Whitehead. We will keep our fingers crossed that at some point we might get joined by Dr. Errick Greene, who is the superintendent of Jackson Public Schools, but he's having some technical issues at the moment. I am Rupen Fofaria. I am an education reporter at EdNC.org, based in Raleigh, North Carolina. EdNC tells stories about education in North Carolina and the future of our state, our students. So what am I, a North Carolinian, doing here with Mississippi's finest? We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. And also in a couple of minutes, I'm going to turn this discussion over to our great panel to really drive. But first, I think it's important that we set the stage for why we're here. And to do that, I am going to share my screen. So I want to tell you about my friend George. George is a real person. I just don't have a picture of George. But George and I became friends in the first grade. And I don't mind sharing with you that what forged our friendship was that we were the two kids in class most often in trouble with the teacher. In Mr. Mitchell's class, there was a 3-strike rule. Misbehave once, and your name goes on the board. Mine and George's names never seemed to come off the board. You misbehave again, and you get a second check mark by your name. That meant you lost the privilege of sitting and learning with the class, and you had to go to the back of the room and read quietly. That didn't bother me so much because I love to read. But George and I spent many a day in the back of the room, and I noticed that while I was turning the pages of my books, finishing them, taking them to the shelf and choosing another, George was mostly just sitting there, staring off into space or walking around the classroom, disrupting the other kids. He knew getting up from the table meant more trouble for him, but he'd do it anyway. Sure enough, George would get a second check mark by his name and strike 3. That meant he had to go with Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Mitchell's wooden paddle for a whooping in the bathroom. This was the early to mid 1980s. George got the paddle so often that Mr. Mitchell named the paddle George on account of, he said it was basically an extension of George's behind by the end of the school year. Now, this isn't a panel on school discipline or whole child approaches, except that in some ways it is. George and I didn't misbehave because we were bad people who had bad hearts. We just didn't always know what was going on in class. And the reason that George would get that second check mark and the paddle while I sat quietly in my chair is I knew how to read, and George did not. Like many who can't read or can't read well, George had low self-esteem. He would get into fights because other kids would pick on him. He was so behind in reading that by the time we finished elementary school and went to middle school, he was behind academically in every subject. It's a struggle for kids like my friend George. According to literacy statistics from Begin to Read, 85% of students who interface with the juvenile court system are striving readers. That's a struggling reader. I just choose to call them striving readers. Striving readers are 4 times more likely to drop out of school than their peers, and 9 out of 10 high school dropouts are not proficient readers. Those 2 statistics are from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and I believe they're a few years old. My friend George was one of these statistics. From middle school, we went on together to W.G. Enloe High School. And while I graduated, received a journalism degree from the University of Maryland, and graduated with honors from Chicago-Kent College of Law, George dropped out in the 9th grade. But according to the Begin to Read Foundation, high school dropouts and striving readers are not eligible or will struggle in 90% of jobs in the U.S. economy. There are a lot of kids like George in this country, and were a lot of kids like George in the state of Mississippi. These are data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, and they are Mississippi scores from 2005 to 2011, which put Mississippi at or near the bottom of the nation during this period. In response, Mississippi's Governor Phil Bryant worked with the Mississippi legislature, and they passed the Literacy-Based Promotion Act in 2013. This law has several provisions and mandates. I've highlighted just a few here. There's required training for all teachers, including pre-service teachers, and encouraged training for school and district leaders. There's multiple layers of coaching, support at the state, regional, and school level, including embedding literacy coaches into schools. So these were for the lowest performing schools. They didn't just have literacy coaches who were visiting them. They had literacy coaches that worked out of the school. There was an emphasis on early identification, recognizing that 3rd grade is too late to discover that readers are struggling. And so there was intentionality around kindergarten and 1st grade screening, prioritizing parent communication and notification. A more recent amendment to the law mandates individual reading plans for every student. And of course, it is a Literacy-Based Promotion Act, which means that there is retention for 3rd graders who don't pass the reading exam. The idea, at least, is an interconnected network from those who wrote and passed the law to the Mississippi Department of Education, which was tasked with guiding implementation and creating necessary resources and supports, to district level leaders and principals who are on the ground to monitor and directly support those on the very front lines, the teachers who are in front of these kids who we all want to see reading proficiently. Is it working? We're going to talk about that. What we know is that REL conducted a study in the first years after the law was implemented, which showed educator progress, with teachers going from the 31st percentile in quality of instruction to the 58th percentile, and from the 48th percentile in educator knowledge to the 59th percentile. We also know that students shared gains. In 2018-19, our most recent pre-pandemic school year, 83% of Mississippi's 3rd graders were at least proficient readers. That number was actually higher the year before, but Mississippi raised the bar on its measurement of proficiency, but still 83%, 2018-2019. I'm going to come back to that stat. But here are the NAEP results, which were written about so widely. And you can see steady growth. But I've highlighted the 2019 year, which was the year Mississippi stood out as the state to show improvement. But it's notable because it's the first cohort of 4th graders who spent their entire K through 3 years in schools that implemented the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. But I'm coming back to this 83%. Why are we talking to Mississippi leaders? As an education reporter in North Carolina, I travel my state and meet talented and dedicated education leaders often. I meet talented and dedicated teachers frequently. But we passed our own reading law. That was in 2012, the year before Mississippi. At that time, roughly 55% of North Carolina third graders scored proficiently on our state's reading exam. Last year, 7 school years later, third graders scoring at proficiency were roughly 57%, the slightest of gains. Laws and policy don't always translate to results. And so let's learn from these Mississippi experts about how it can. I am going to stop this screen share. And welcome back our panelists. So thank you, Dr. Wright, Kristen, Wynn, Dr. Whitehead, for being here. And I'll start with you, Ms. Wynn. I showed a slide that just highlights some of this law, but there are a number of provisions and a lot of specificity in the law. How important was that, the specificity, to setting the stage for successful implementation?
Thank you, Ruben. We knew that teachers needed training grounded in the science of reading. So the specificity was essential. And so since we knew that they needed that to effectively implement the systematic, explicit instructions, the interventions that the law called for, the preventative measures in early grades that the law called for, we designed a twofold professional development plan. So the first part of it was letters, which was on the larger scale of professional development system that helped to increase teachers' knowledge of the science of reading. On a smaller, more regional scale, we conducted professional development and professional learning communities, school-based professional development led by our literacy coaches that focused on the application of the science of reading. It's one thing to have training, and we know the impact of professional development, but we did not want this to be another piece of professional development that teachers brought back and put on the shelf. We wanted to make sure that we followed up with a focus on the application and some of that smaller scale professional development that we knew teachers needed to effectively implement. The parts of this law focused on the structured literacy model. It focused on an uninterrupted literacy block. It focused on effective small group instruction. All of the components that were listed there in the law. We wanted to make sure teachers were equipped with the resources and the tools that they need to support our students. And we are excited to say that we have trained over 15,000 teachers in Mississippi in the science of reading. And we have witnessed this transformation of schools and districts with the training of the science, but also with the coaching that accompanies that training.
Thank you. Yes. And you know, you talk about the coaching and the training. One of the things I think is special about the law is that it put the authority for making the hiring decisions for coaches, for training, for consultants at the state level. Mm-hmm. Dr. Wright, can I invite you into this, and can you talk a little bit about the importance of the state having that sort of authority?
Absolutely, and thank you, Rupen, for including me in this conversation. This has just really been an amazing piece that the state has been able to accomplish. I mean, initially when the law was passed, it was only given $9 million in funding, and I went back across to the legislature and I said, look, if we're going to make an impact, we've got to have more money. And so the first thing that they did was that they increased that. We now get $15 million every year to support our work. But, you know, passing a law and then designing its implementation are two different things. So I've got to say they passed the law, but we as the State Department really took it upon ourselves, and Kristen gave you some of the very fine details of what does this mean to implement something well. We retained a lot of control over the hiring, and that was a very conscious decision on our part. We hired professional development coordinators that are providing professional development in a just-in-time way across the entire state, but we hired them. We took control of hiring the literacy coaches. We knew that this was going to be a key piece to this. And so rather than just pushing the money out to the districts, we retained control because we knew we needed the best and brightest to be out there working with our teachers across the state. And our approach was probably a lot more top down than bottom up. I'm going to be honest about that, but I also have to be honest with you. We were 50th at the time. No doubt about it. We were at the bottom, and there was a real sense of urgency about how this needed to be done, and it needed to be done in a way that was thorough, in a way that supported the research. Kristen mentioned we trained every K through 3 teacher, general ed and special ed. We also trained our elementary principals so that they would know what that looked like. We also provided that training for our superintendents. It was critical to us that everybody know the 5 components of the foundational skills of reading. I mean, that was something that we were not seeing. We even extended the invitation to those people at higher ed that taught our ed prep classes so that they could go through the training as well. And as a result of the popularity of this training, we now have middle school and high school teachers that are asking us to open this training up for them because they've got children that don't, or they're still struggling as readers and don't have the skill sets to know exactly how to diagnose that. We also went back in 2016 and passed a law. We knew the importance of this, and we knew that every teacher that was teaching reading in Mississippi needed to pass a scientifically based assessment on the foundational skills of reading. And so that was put in legislation in 2016. And now all teachers that teach reading are required to take the foundational skills of reading. The other part of it that I think is really important, and Kristen referenced that, is the monitoring system. We put in a K through 3 monitoring system that's done at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. And that gives teachers and principals feedback on how children are doing. The other thing that I think that we did that was really important to me, and I always say, and Kristen she's heard me say this, language matters, right? And so we never talk about retention. My staff doesn't talk about retention. We don't address retention. It's prevention. And that's the whole key for us, is getting in early and preventing struggling readers from continuing to be struggling readers. And I think another really important part of this law was that we now are required to communicate with families at the beginning of every year. If your child is struggling, then the school has to send a letter to the parent and say that they're struggling. But more importantly, what is the school going to do about it? So it's not just that Carey's struggling in reading, but here's the strategies we're going to be using with Carey during the school year. And then parents are communicated with throughout the year so that by the time the end of the year comes around and the assessment is administered, there should be no surprises to parents whether their kids are still struggling or not. I'll stop there.
Like I said, this was a very broad law. There was a lot in it. And there was a lot more that went into the state's implementation. So you just covered a whole bunch of ground, and I love it. I love it. But I'd like to unpack that a little bit, and I want to start with where you began with the coaching and the training. And I want to go to you, Dr. Whitehead, as a principal. I'm curious, what did training look like for your teachers? What did coaching look like for your teachers?
Okay, so at the beginning of this law being passed, as administrators, we knew it was an urgency to make sure that our teachers had the content knowledge in order to help build and move with urgency to get these kids up to a level of passing the literacy-based act, right? So in part with the coaching, I can honestly say the State Department, Kim Yana, Dr. Berg, Kristen, they made a seamless approach to making sure that the coaches were giving us information that the teachers could actually apply. So the coaches came into our buildings not being punitive or the teachers feeling like it's being evaluated, but it was more of a support. Teachers felt supported in all areas. Along with the coaches being support to the teachers, the coaches and the administrators began a cohesive unity. We had the same language when it came to understanding instructional best practices. We had the same language when it came to talking about progress monitoring, so that the teachers wasn't hearing two different sides of what this should look like. We were on one accord hand in hand, making sure that our teachers are supported, that they had all of the resources that they needed. And they also had someone in the classroom there to say, hey, I think we should do it this way, or I think research shows us that we should apply it this way, so that it's not punitive. The teachers didn't feel like they were being monitored at all times. They felt like, hey, this person is here to support me. This person is here to catch me. It's my safety net. So the teachers were gung-ho about getting the coaches inside of the building. We started having, our coaches came in as full-time, full support 5 days a week. And eventually, as the years went on, with the leadership as well as the coaching support from our literacy coaches, we began to move into limited support, where we only had a coach maybe 2 days a week. Now, our teachers were so spoiled from having the support of having that literacy coach there every day that they were like, oh no, we need them more. But I had to tell them this gradual release was a great thing. To gradually release from having 5 days a week to 2 days a week to now once a month to now once every 9 weeks. That's an awesome thing, because that goes to show of the level of work and integrity that's put into place. And we're not just doing this to just say we're doing or be compliant, that we are applying and children are learning. And at the end of the day, that's what we wanted. We wanted to work ourselves out of having to be coached.
And I want, bearing in mind why folks are joining us, hiring a coach or putting a coach in place is one thing, but making it work, having the unity that you're talking about,
right?
Making those sorts of relationships, that's a whole other thing.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember how that happened?
To be honest, it's the buy-in of the principal. It's the buy-in of the administrators. We know from Mississippi, I'm a Mississippian. I'm a Cantonian. I want Canton students to perform at the highest level. With that passion, I want to be with that passion and with us wanting our children to be the best, not just in Canton, but Mississippi statewide. I know that my leaders are entrusting me to make sure that this works. So my buy-in is that, okay, I'm gonna make sure that I understand the best practices of reading so that my teachers understand the best practices of reading, so that we can make sure that we are putting forth the best in front of our children. So it starts with buy-in from the leadership. Once that coach come into that building, it's on that principal to make sure that the coach know, hey, I'm here to support, and I want to be able to have the same real-time feedback that you're giving the teachers, that we have the same feedback when I go in and observe teachers, so that we're not destroying what a great teacher could be, but we're still coaching and supporting that teacher. I think educational leadership has moved past from being just a management system. We are the instructional leaders now. So we have to put forth best practices in place in order to support and nurture best teachers in front of our children.
And that's one side of it, right? The principal leadership. The other side of it is the quality and composure, composition, I guess, of the coach. And so I want to go, Ms. Wynn and Dr. Wright, when you guys are hiring these coaches, I mean, that was one of the great things about the law is you get to do it. It's not a district by district decision. And I remember, when Kimyana was sitting in the seat that you sit in now, Kristen, she would talk about how much went into the decision and the interview process of choosing these coaches. Can you two talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. Our hiring process is extremely rigorous. And I had some trouble hearing earlier. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We're good. Okay, good. Content knowledge is important, but the ability to work with adults is equally important. Again, like I said, our hiring process is extremely rigorous. We have a performance-based task that we have those applicants do or facilitate when we're doing the hiring process. So they do a role play, and they may do a role play with another person that's on the interview panel. And during that role play, they have 30 minutes to look at a problem of practice, and they go through that problem of practice. And when we get into the interview, they role play with one of us. So it's essential, like she says, the buy-in and the rapport of the coach. Those coaches, our coaches have to have the content knowledge, but they also have to have the ability to work with adults. The connection is the foundation for effective coaching relationship. Like she said, building the rapport, the respect, the trust that teachers have to have. And our coaches have to be coachable too. Communication is key. With teachers, it's important how they effectively provide feedback to teachers during their debrief. Thomas Crane, and we go through that training with coaches, new hirees. We go through extensive training. So once you pass the role play, once you pass the interview process, then we train you on how to have courageous conversations, how to give effective feedback, how to listen. A part of coaching is listening to your teachers. You don't want to get into an emotional conversations with teachers. And we know, just like children, home life happens to our teachers. So they may be coming to school having a bad day, and you don't want that to become a wall or a barrier for your coaching that day. So how do we have those conversations where they're courageous conversations, they're factual information, we are building on your strengths, but we're also providing you opportunities for growth. And so it's a skill. I say it's a skill. It's an art. It's like some of our coaches say, it's like being a salesman. You know, you go in to buy a car and you don't want to buy a car. You leave with this really expensive vehicle. So coaching is like that. It's an art. But the one thing I have to say, our coaches are the best, but they're coachable. And they know that as leaders, we're coachable. I take and receive feedback from my leadership team all the time, whether it's good or bad. You receive it and you grow from it. So choosing the coaches, making sure we'll build your content knowledge, but you being able to work effectively with adults is so crucial and so important.
I just want to add one comment to that. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Okay. When the law was first passed, the legislature fully expected us to come out of the gate with 75 coaches. They're going to hire 75 coaches. And when we got all the applications in, which was well over 100, we ended up hiring 25. And people said, seriously? And we were like, seriously. We wanted the best and the brightest, and we have stuck to our guns every single year that we've got to hire another coach. And to Kristen's point, these coaches are also coached once a month. We have professional development that's ongoing for them. They receive resources to help with their teachers, but you've got to be very, very sure of the people that you're hiring, because it's make it or break it. When they get in that school, they've got to connect to teachers. They've got to connect to the principal, and they have to be willing to, as Kristen just said, they've got to be willing to listen to feedback as well. But our coaches are the best, bar none. I would put them up against anybody, you know, across the United States, because our interview process is tough, and the coaches will tell you that it's tough, but the results, I think, speak for themselves.
Yeah, it's quality over quantity there. And you know, our attendees might have noticed we got Dr. Greene. He's arrived. He's reached us. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm so sorry I've had these challenges. Just needed to go on a trusty old hotspot.
That's okay. This is
get around the district firewalls.
Listen, this is a little taste of pandemic era schooling. You know, there's students all across our country that are dealing with these same issues. But I'm so happy. I'm so happy that you arrived. You arrived right on time, because in my notes I was going to go to you next. We have been talking a little bit about the coaching and the training that the Literacy-Based Promotion Act allows for. There's a slide that I removed from the original presentation, but I just want to come back to it before I ask you my question, Dr. Greene. But I think it's important to look at the multiple layers. You've got state literacy director, which office is hiring coaches, but is also putting in place state literacy coordinators that are supporting regional coordinators that are supporting these embedded, in residence literacy coaches. And so there's really attention that's being paid to every layer here. And it's not just with the coaching. It's with the training too, isn't it? The law requires that every teacher be trained. But Dr. Greene, I wonder if I can go to you to give me some perspective on the training and to talk a little bit about the importance of school and district leaders getting this training as well.
Right. Again, wonderful, really timely, important discussion here. We, for our part, I think some will know that our district was facing a state takeover for a myriad of reasons in terms of just kind of the educational outputs, and not that folks weren't working hard and wanting children to succeed, but we just weren't getting it done. And certainly weren't doing it and doing the work in an aligned manner. And so really appreciative that as I entered the district 2 years ago, that the state was already working through and supporting in very real, concrete ways the continued development around the science and the art around reading, teaching reading. And building reading skills. And so as I joined JPS, we already had embedded coaching throughout the district. But what I found was a lot of that work was direct to teachers, and appropriately so, in conversations and some alignment with school leaders, but there didn't seem to be a strong partnership with district leadership, school-based leadership, and the state coaching team and leadership to ensure that what happened in classrooms, that it got better faster, right? And so the feedback given to teachers, were we aligned in the kind of feedback that was given and the follow-up and the supports around, what we need to see next and what that continuous growth and the planning and just all of those things would be. The professional development that was being offered either by district level leaders or by our partners, some of the providers that we would bring in, consultants and such, was all of that aligned. And the reality is that teachers were getting all kinds of messages about, it's that joke, well, who hit me? What did I do? Who said what? And what messages should I be following and focused on now? My ability as a teacher, as a leader, whomever, to really focus and do the really difficult, tough work to get better is going to hinge on the clarity of those messages and my ability to see what it is that I need to do differently and better in the moment and the next moment and the next. And so, that professional development was something that we had to arrest, had to really align, get much more focused on, and ensure that the things that we said we were looking for, that we actually went looking for those, right. and that we were able to lift up the models, whether in the district or from other places on video or what have you, lift those models up to say, this is what we're talking about when we talk about excellence and questioning and developing the phonological awareness, on and on and on. I don't know that I fully answered the question, but that was something that I found as I came into Jackson Public Schools. And I should say this too, because I don't want to miss it. It was really, really important for me as we continued the work to identify school leaders and to prep them. One of the questions that became just a part of my process in interviewing school leaders, what do you know about teaching reading? Mm-hmm. What is your capacity to coach and support, make smart decisions about reading instruction in your school? That's right. And not that that's a deal breaker, but we need to know that on the front end, because if you've got all these other great things that would cause us to want to bring you onto the team in this role, then we know that we've got some really targeted work with you as a school leader to ensure that you can lead reading instruction. And oftentimes that would mean that perhaps you step back and allow someone else, perhaps a teacher or a coach or someone from MDE, to lead out in this discussion because they've got greater capacity around that. So just really rethinking what it means to lead in the moment in areas where perhaps you don't have the greatest skill.
Right, right, because it's so important. I mean, for your hires to know, but as you were talking about earlier, even the school and district leaders, to know what are you looking for? The law, if we go back to the law, there's going to be mandates, there's going to be compliance standards. But we're here talking not about the policy, but about implementation. So what does it mean to have these compliance standards, but not teach in a way, not measure in a way that is focused just on compliance, yes or no, but on what that compliance means, whether it's meaningful or not.
And it forced our hand on several, so I've talked a bit about alignment of professional development, but it forced our hand on several fronts. Our curricular materials, what's the quality of these materials? If folks are, if I'm a brand new teacher, or if teaching reading is not my jam, or whatever my situation is, what's the quality of these materials that I'm utilizing to ground my instruction? Two, again, back to the professional development, is it the hit it and quit it and just keep moving with all these disparate topics, or is there some alignment, some pathway for getting stronger, faster, or better around teaching reading? And then for us, we were so heavy in terms of our intervention programs. We had interventions up the wazoo, right? Everywhere you look, there's a different intervention. And again, folks are working really, really hard to intervene, but about what, to what end, and how do we know that it was this intervention versus this one that really helped us to get the gains that we were looking for, or not to get the gains. And so alignment for us was a very real thing, and not just a word, very real issue that we had to address.
Yes, and Dr. Wright, I want to move to you, because we've heard from Dr. Greene, an exceptional district superintendent. We've heard from Dr. Whitehead, an exceptional principal. If you want to see implementation successful, how important is it to have intentional leadership? The types of leaders that we have joining us today.
It's absolutely critical. I mean, I can't say enough about intentionality. I mean, there's nothing that's been done in this law that the state department has been responsible for that has not been intentional. Let me just be very clear about that. But it's the same thing as leadership. I mean, you've got Dr. Whitehead, you've got Dr. Greene, who are very intentional in their work. And that sends a very powerful message to staff that this is what I consider important. This is what I'm considering important in your work. And I'm going to be here as the superintendent or the principal to make sure that it's done well. The reason we need to do that is because this is about children we're talking about. These are children's lives we're talking about. And so I don't underscore that, probably enough. I mean, that to me, you've got to have the right person in the right job and leading this work. I mean, I think we as a department, one of our key strategies has been building capacity. It has been from the time I've got here. We expanded, we doubled down on our professional development across the entire state. Professional development for teachers, professional development for principals, professional development for administrators. And it was interesting when I first, I had a meeting with a group of superintendents about this. And somebody said, well, why do we need to do this? Like, why do we need to go through this training? And before I could even respond, this was a group of superintendents. This whole other table of superintendents said, what? Like, are you kidding? Yeah, we need to know this, because if we're walking into classrooms, how are we going to know whether they're doing what they should be doing or not? And so I really applaud that. I'm a firm believer that everybody comes to this job each and every day wanting to Dr. Greene's point, wanting to do the very best they can, the very best they can. But some people come in with greater gifts than others, but that doesn't mean that they can't be coached up to a level that we need them to be coached up to for children. Because I think that's, to me, is what is a very critical part. And when I say this again about language matters, Dr. Greene's point is well taken. What he says needs to be the same as what Dr. Whitehead's saying. That needs to be the same as what Kristen's saying and the coaches are saying, so that all the teachers are getting is the same identical message and the same identical coaching, regardless of who that's coming from.
Thank you. I want to move on. I want to move the discussion on towards these young scholars, the babies that are coming up in Mississippi. But before I leave what we've been talking about, I noticed that there's a question that came in talking about the value of the professional development. So there's training, there's coaching, and there's continued professional development, Kristen, that you were talking about at the very beginning. And the question is, how is it administered? How is it tracked? Is that happening at the state level? Is it done through any kind of licensing or testing?
So initially, when we started the professional development, I'm smiling and laughing about this, on the large scale, we did not have a system like some states do, where we put this in and teachers could go in and register when we first started this. So we were literally in the literacy office with chart papers and coaches coordinating professional development and saying, okay, you reach out to this district, we have a map in here, and this district is close to this district, so you call them and we'll have their facility. So it was all hands on deck when we started this. So now with our large scale professional development with letters, because we're still offering letters, we do have it where they can register through a site that was created with Voyager Sopris. And then they've been registering for letters through our RESA. So all of our regional educational service agencies. So all of our smaller scale trainings that we do regionally around literacy, they can go through and register through the RESA. Our large scale letters, they now can go through and register through RESA. But when we initially started this, we said, we don't have time to wait for some platform to put this in. This is urgent. It was urgent for us. And so we just started up, and we're teachers. So what better way to get this together than to organize it with anchor charts, and we were strategically getting it done that way. And so now, yes, we do have a system where folks can go in across Mississippi and register. And we also, Rupen, offer this training to our pre-service teachers. So Dr. Wright spoke earlier about the assessment that they take leaving out of our universities and colleges, but we also offer letters training to our pre-service teachers as well as our faculty, because we don't want to start when they get into the classroom. We want to catch you before you get there and help you to better understand the science and how to apply that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And all of it, all of that, what we've been talking about, all of it at every level, it all comes down to, the teacher in the classroom and the students that are sitting there, who we want to see become proficient readers, who we want to see become readers. We've talked about a lot of the things in the law that sort of come along and that superintendents and principals and teachers are doing. But I want to go to you, Dr. Whitehead, and I wonder if you can take us into the classroom and what it looks like, this law that's passed. What does implementation look like? How does progress monitoring, how does instruction, how does that look in the classroom?
See, my face lit up when you said classroom, right? Because that's my safe haven. So one thing that we started was making sure that our culture was data driven. Dr. Wright spoke on making sure that the parents were communicated with, not just, hey, Sally has a deficit, but what are we doing to help Sally, right? Well, we not only communicated with our parents, we communicated with our students. It was vital that they knew their target and what their learning goals were and where they fail within these deficits. If it was a deficit, hey, Sally, it's okay. This is what your teachers, interventionists, teacher assistants, even your principal is going to do to help you overcome these deficits. We set out to make sure that they knew their goals. Progress monitoring happened not just 3 times a year. Of course, it was state mandated 3 times a year, but we went farther than what the state wanted. We said, okay, we're going to progress monitor every month. We're going to set small goals and make sure we conquer
Was that a school
those
level
goals
or a
every
district
month.
decision to do it? Okay.
That was district. That was district level. Again, it came from the head. Our curriculum office, our superintendent at the time was like, hey, we got to make sure that the students know where they fail when it comes to targeting these goals, not just the teacher, because it can sit right there at that teacher's desk. But once it becomes student touchable, hey, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? So every month, these students will have challenges. We set out to call it level up challenges. It was like Super Mario. We was going to the next level. Every month, these students knew their goals. They placed it on their goal board physically. They physically went in and moved these data boards. We made them cute as possible. We made it so that it was cute, student friendly, elementary friendly, something that the students could relate to. They knew their goals. They knew their goals for each month. They would run up to me, principal, Dr. Whitehead, I met my goal. Or, hey, I was 3 points short of my goal, but hey, it was this standard that I fell short in. So I know when I go to my interventionist, we need to focus on this standard. We were standard driven, data driven, school-wide, district-wide. And that in itself helped to build not just the momentum of the school, but our community. Our community rallied around wanting to make sure that our students passed this 3rd grade gate, that our students were, even in kindergarten with the MCAS assessment, those kindergarten babies, they knew their goal targets, they knew what number that they wanted to be on, what color they wanted to be on, and the parents rallied around us as well. Outside of having these challenges, we celebrated. I mean, we have a good time at school. We celebrate monthly, weekly. If someone meets a goal, it's time to celebrate. So the students knew tangibly that they would get something, but after a while, it became intrinsic. It was inside that I knew I was meeting my goal. I knew that I was making myself proud, not just my teacher, not just my principal, but hey, if I'm reaching this goal and I'm meeting and I'm conquering what I'm set out to do, I'm becoming a better reader. So it just changed the whole dynamic of our community.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Greene.
Can I underscore one, just kudos. I love talking to smart people. I really appreciated all of that, but there's something I really want to underscore there, and what Dr. Whitehead described. You know, we started talking about the law, and our focus here is about the implementation of the law, but this has to be far more than following the law. This has to be much like, we're in this pandemic, and do we mask or don't we? Do we distance or don't we? It's got to be far more than the things that are mandated or not, but the culture and the belief, the value around, the issue here. If we truly value a literate society, if we truly value young people developing literacy skills that are far beyond being able to decode some words on a page, but learning the codes that allow me to live the kind of life that I want to live, that allow me to advocate for myself or understand the challenges that exist in writing, sometimes where systems are set up not necessarily for me to succeed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If that's what we value, then we'll do the things that prepare ourselves to prepare them for that kind of life, for that kind of skill building. It's got to be far beyond compliance. Exactly. And that too was one of the things that I know we've had to, and there's still a bit of that we are working through in our district, because folks they don't want to be on the naughty list, right? And so I get that, but it's got to be far more than compliance. And when we understand that this is more than just not being on the naughty list, more than just not failing, but about truly soaring, then you start to behave differently. You talk about it differently, you engage in it differently. What excellence looks like is leveled up far more so than where you are today. So it's that kind of, I think, broader leadership that's not just sitting in the superintendent's seat or the principal or the state suit, but the leadership that you start to see in the community, in the home, in, you know, at churches where we talk about literacy and celebrating successes and all those sorts of things. It's got to be there. Otherwise, we'll always be chasing a grade or a score.
Yes. No, I mean, amen. I'm fascinated by community education and how we can move, you know, more and more towards that, you know, involving the entire community, especially now, you know, with all of the challenges that the pandemic has posed, you know, the importance of community in resilience, you know, of something like that. When you talked, when you were speaking, Dr. Whitehead, that's what jumped out at me is the community involvement.
Yeah.
But how does that happen? You know, I mean, was this something? Was it directly in response to the parent notification and the communication? I mean, how does that happen? How do you create that community engagement?
Well, it's a lot of effort. You know, obviously, from the state, we started with a huge campaign. I mean, it was just a huge campaign, a lot of community meetings that we had to let parents know what we were getting ready to do, the importance of what we were getting ready to do. But you really, I think, to Errick's point and to Shannon's point, it really was the ownership of the leadership around the state. I mean, my team is amazing, and don't let me, I can't even tell you enough about the team that Kristen leads. And when I think about the number of people that we started out with when this law was passed, I think I might have had 3 people at the office, so to launch this whole thing. But I think everybody wanted Mississippi to be better, right? Everybody wanted us to get off the bottom. You know, everybody was sick and tired of, well, thank God for Mississippi, because we were always last, so somebody was always ahead of us. And so we really kind of took this on as, you know what, Mississippi can do this. We can so do this, and we're going to prove to the nation that we can do this. And we've really kept that attitude. And I think our leaders have kept that attitude. Well, guess what? 7 years later, guess where we are? With #1 in the nation on our NAEP scores for our gains in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. And people started to believe. I mean, it was really, we took a culture, I think, of low expectations, and we said, our kids aren't any different than anybody else. If those kids across the United States can achieve amazing things, our kids can achieve amazing things. And we're going to show you, and we're going to prove it. And I think leaders throughout the state, superintendents, principals, teachers in classrooms, all the way down, really took this ownership on this, and pride, particularly when the score started to rise, right? Because everyone was like, oh my gosh, we went up again. And oh, well, guess what? We went up again. And guess what? We went up again. So it was this whole flywheel effect, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know, once you kind of get things in motion, things kept going in motion. And I couldn't be prouder of the work that that is happening across the state, with our leaders across the state, with my team that works across the state. I describe them as they can't say no team, right? So whenever somebody comes up with another big idea, then nobody says no. Everybody says, all right, let's get it done. And so we pushed out a lot of resources across the state to really help our teachers too. It wasn't just you got to go get this done. It was, okay, here's the PD, here's resources. We put it all up on our website. I know we're kind of running out of time, but I do want to say one thing. We have told everybody around the nation, go to our website, literally, because I speak a lot, pull down our resources, take Mississippi's name off of it, stick your own state's name on it, and use it. We're all in this for the same reason, and that is to ensure, as Errick has so eloquently said, our children have a guaranteed future ahead of them, and they're not going to be left behind because of something we've not done. And I think that's the important part of us as a nation, and that's the reason, you know, more than happy to share that, because that's something everybody's working for the same thing.
Yes. Y'all, I'm so torn because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to move on with some of the other questions I have, but I kind of also don't want to move away from that community spirit and that community engagement. And so I want to stick with that. And I want to go back to you, Dr. Whitehead, to talk about at the, at that very local level, when you talk about the community outside of your school, how did you create that community excitement that Dr. Wright was just talking about at the state level?
Well, we are in the age of social media. So we tell our stories. We harp on the beautiful pictures of what's happening inside our schools. We brag on our teachers. We brag on our parents. We brag on the students. We make sure that the community knows that our teachers work hard, our leaders are working hard, and our students are working just as hard as anyone else. We make sure that we capitalize on the good. It's so much bad that we can pull out of any situation. But for children to see the good that they're doing, and for someone to really pinpoint that out and to shout them out on Facebook, to make sure that we're telling our stories, that we're telling the stories of how teachers are growing children, that we're telling the story of how Saturday school is really making a difference in these students' lives, and how they are now top performers in math, and they are now top performers when it comes to reading. Another thing also, we go out and we pull the community into us. For a long time, our district, it was school and community. So now we go out to the news stations, we tell our stories, we invite them in. We ask for mentors to come in with our students. We go to churches because our children are in the churches. So we go to them. We ask for all of our community entities, hey, if someone can build something, can you come and build it at our school, just so that everyone will know that they are a part of us, that you all are an extension of us. And everything that you are as an agency want to happen inside of these schools and want to build with these children, we're working just as hard. It's not something that, hey, we're just going to teach them and then you can get them when they become citizens. No, we're helping you to build world-class citizens, so that when they come inside of your agencies to work, that it's not a retraining, that they're ready for the workforce, that they're ready for college, they're ready for whatever they set themselves out that they want to be. So really just making sure that we tell the story that it's not all bad. Even the bad has some goodness to it. And we really appreciate everything that our community has to offer our students.
Yes, absolutely. Now there's something you touched on in there, celebrating the students and a student-centered approach. And I want to go over back to you, Dr. Greene, real quick, because I got one last lightning round question I'm going to ask. But when we're talking about the students, and we're talking about a law here that is based on student performance, that's the measuring stick, student performance, that tends to put a lot of pressure on kids. And there's something that you all did in Jackson Public Schools that has caught my attention, in talking about the wellness program, that Office of Wellness. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. I think that that sounded to me like something that was important in the implementation process. Yeah,
I'll try to be as succinct as possible with this. We created an office that early on, it was focused on discipline and responding to young people's bad decision making. Well, there's also the other side of that, the proactive work that you do to support them in making better decisions. But then as we think more about just the entire enterprise of teaching and learning and schooling and all of the experiences that young people have with one another, with adults, even adults with adults, adults within the system, with adults outside of the system, just all of those things, it just made sense for us to try and weave all of that work together, and seeing the consequences and discipline and all of that as a total last resort, and the 90+ % of the work being around how do we understand one another, understand the pressures and the challenges that we're all working in, and how do we support one another to be our best selves, to give ourselves grace, to give one another grace, and to make smart decisions along the way, even when we're stressed, even when we're struggling. even when we don't know, even when we're afraid that someone might pay attention to us, and so we want to ridicule the other someone classmate, the other someone peer, you know, teacher, educator, because we do it as well as adults, right? We ridicule one another, and oftentimes it's when we don't feel so secure in ourselves. And so creating really intentional work strategies, a vision around how we live into really what's one of our strategic commitments of creating joyful learning environments, very clearly and intentionally, not just safe, but joyful. How do we create joy in all this, even as I learn to read?
Not just safe, joyful. I love
Joyful.
that. I love that. There is one last question that I want to ask everybody, but I want to, you know, just about whether, if you had the chance, there's one thing you would either add to or change about Mississippi's Literacy-Based Promotion Act. You know, 7 years after its implementation. But I want to ask Kimyana first, if that's going to get me with my name on the chalkboard and a couple of check marks beside it, if I do that, because I know we're running out of time. And you're muted, Kimyana, I'm sorry.
All right, can you hear me?
I can.
Hello, everyone again. Hi, Dr. Greene. You're a couple of minutes over, so if you can go possibly no more than 3 minutes to 150, our next, well, 150 here. Our next session starts in about 10 minutes.
Okay, well then let's do it lightning round style, guys. I'll start with Dr. Wright, soon to be Dr. Wynn, then Dr. Greene, and Dr. Whitehead.
So we've already gone there, just so you know. I would have extended the law to pre-K to begin with. It should have been a pre-K through grade 3, and we're already there.
So my addition to that would be to extend our professional learning to leaders. We need required leadership training. We're asking district leaders to do a lot with our law. And we're providing some of the professional development, but we have lots of leaders that are coming up the ranks with high school and middle school and math and other area backgrounds to elementary. So that required leadership training around the science of reading, for me, is critical.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Wright. Actually, I agree with both responses, but my first was the pre-K. A real and extended focus on pre-K, supporting pre-K, ensuring that pre-K is available, and perhaps even mandating pre-K.
Yeah.
Dr. Whitehead.
Okay, so we touched on admin, we touched on pre-K. I will just like to say, I would just keep it going with making sure that our grades 4 on up teachers continue to have this training. Literacy don't just stop with 3rd grade, and phonics don't just stop with 3rd grade. So we have to continue with the phonemic awareness and the phonics instruction and the 5 components of reading throughout K-12, even extended into community colleges and universities.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Thanks for your leadership and your education today. And thanks to all the attendees.